There's a moment almost every woman knows, even if she's never said it out loud. It's 11 p.m., or maybe it's 6 a.m. before anyone else is awake, and you're lying there with this quiet, heavy thought. I don't know how much longer I can keep doing this. Not dramatically, not like you're about to fall apart. Just tired. Tired of trying so hard and still feeling stuck. Tired of doing everything right and still not seeing the life you imagined for yourself. If that sentence just hit something in you, I want you to keep listening, because by the end of this, you're going to understand something about that feeling that almost nobody explains correctly. You're going to learn the exact words Louise Hay said to repeat in that moment, not as a cute quote for a journal, but as a tool she believed could interrupt the entire pattern keeping you stuck. And more importantly, you're going to understand why it works, because the affirmation alone means nothing without what's underneath it. Here's the problem most women never get told. When you feel like giving up, you assume the problem is the situation, the job that isn't working out, the relationship that feels one-sided, the body that doesn't look the way you want, the bank account that never seems to grow no matter how careful you are. You think if this one thing changed, I'd feel okay again. But Louise Hay spent decades working with people who believed exactly that, and what she found, over and over, was almost always the same hidden root. The outside situation wasn't the cause. It was the evidence. The real cause was a story running underneath it, a belief about your own worth that had been quietly directing your life for years, usually since childhood. Usually so early you don't even remember choosing it. Here's what that looks like in real life. Picture a woman. We'll call her in your mind whoever feels familiar, because this pattern is unbelievably common, who keeps ending up in relationships where she gives more than she receives. She's not naive. She's smart. She's self-aware. She can see the imbalance clearly when a friend describes the same situation. But when it's her own life, she keeps explaining it away. He's just stressed right now. I should be more patient. Maybe I'm asking for too much. On the surface, this looks like a relationship problem. Louise Hay would have asked a different question entirely. What does this woman believe she's allowed to receive? Because people don't just attract circumstances randomly. They attract circumstances that match the level of love they secretly believe they deserve. If somewhere inside her there's an old belief, I have to earn love, I have to be easy, I have to not be too much, then no matter how many relationships she cycles through, she'll keep recreating the same imbalance, just with a different face across the table. This is the part that should stop you for a second, because it reframes everything. It's not that life keeps doing this to you. It's that an old belief keeps quietly building the same room over and over, and you keep walking into it thinking it's a new house. And here's where it gets even more uncomfortable, in the way truth usually does. If that root belief goes unaddressed, it doesn't just affect relationships. It bleeds into everything. The woman who doesn't think she deserves more in love often doesn't ask for the raise she deserves either. She undercharges for her work. She apologizes for taking up space in a conversation. She looks in the mirror and her inner voice narrates a list of flaws before it ever says anything kind. None of this is a coincidence. Louise Hay's entire body of work was built on this idea, that the relationship you have with yourself is the blueprint for the relationship you have with money, with your body, with love, with opportunity. Fix the blueprint, and every room built from it eventually changes shape too. So, what do you do in the moment it actually hits you? The moment you feel like giving up? This is where the affirmation comes in. Louise Hay taught that in moments of despair, the mind is most vulnerable to repeating its oldest, cruelest stories, so you have to interrupt it deliberately, almost forcefully, with a new one. The phrase she encouraged people to return to was a version of, I am willing to release the pattern in me that created this condition. Not, I'll fix the outside problem. Not, I'll try harder. I am willing to release the pattern in me. Because you can't release what you won't admit is yours. And you can't change a belief you've never even identified as a belief. Most women have been living inside it for so long it just feels like personality. It feels like that's just how I am. Here's an idea worth sitting with. You were not born believing you weren't enough. No, baby comes into the world thinking that. Every version of that belief was taught by a moment, a comment, a comparison, a silence where you needed reassurance and didn't get it. which means it was learned, and anything learned can be unlearned. That single reframe is the foundation of everything Louise Hay built her work around, and it's the reason mirror work became such a central part of her teaching, because she believed you couldn't talk yourself out of a belief using only your thoughts. You had to look yourself in the eyes, literally, in a mirror, and speak differently to yourself than the old pattern ever allowed. Most people find this excruciating the first time. Saying, "I love you, I'm doing the best I can" to your own reflection can feel almost unbearably vulnerable. That discomfort isn't a sign you're doing it wrong. It's a sign you've touched the actual wound. Now here's the part that changes how you should think about the moments you feel like giving up altogether. What if that feeling isn't a sign you're failing? What if it's a sign you finally hit the edge of an old belief that's ready to be released? And the discomfort is just what it feels like when something that's been buried for years starts to surface. Almost every woman who's done real inner work will tell you the same thing. Right before the biggest shift, things often feel like they're falling apart. Not because you're doing something wrong, but because the old identity has to loosen its grip before a new one can take its place. The giving up feeling, looked at this way, isn't the end of the story. It's often the exact moment right before the turn. Let's go deeper, because there's a second layer most people miss entirely. It's not enough to just say the affirmation once and expect the feeling to disappear. Louise Hay was clear that the subconscious mind doesn't respond to a single sentence. It responds to repetition, because that's exactly how the original wound got installed in the first place. Nobody decided in one moment, "I am not enough." It was reinforced slowly, situation after situation, until it became automatic. Undoing it works the same way, in reverse, which is why she often suggested saying an affirmation not once, but dozens of times a day, especially in the moments you'd normally default to the old script. Brushing your teeth, driving, lying in bed before sleep. The affirmation isn't a magic spell that works because of the words themselves. It works because of what repetition does to a mind that's been trained for years to expect the worst from itself. Think about the contrast here, because it matters. Picture two women hearing this exact same piece of advice tonight. One hears "repeat this affirmation," tries it twice, feels silly, and goes back to her usual inner monologue by tomorrow morning. The other treats it the way Louise Hay actually intended, not as a one-time fix, but as a daily practice of catching the old voice mid-sentence and replacing it again and again, even when it feels unnatural, even when nothing seems to be changing yet. 6 months from now, those two women are not living the same life. Not because one was more disciplined, but because one let the old pattern keep building the same room, and the other, slowly, brick by brick, built a different one. This is the point where you have to ask yourself something honest. Which one of those women do you usually become when life gets hard? Most of us, if we're truthful, have been the first woman more often than the second. That's not a failure. It's just information. And information is the first thing that ever changes a pattern, because you cannot release what you refuse to see clearly. There's something else Louise Hay emphasized that almost never gets repeated in the watered-down versions of her work you see online. Self-love was never meant to be the reward at the end of fixing your life. She taught it as the starting point. Most people have this backwards. They think, once I lose the weight, once I get the relationship, once I make the money, then I'll finally love myself. But she argued the order has to reverse. The self-love has to come first, because it's the thing that actually changes your decisions in the meantime. A woman who loves herself doesn't tolerate the relationship that drains her, because something in her simply won't allow it anymore. A woman who loves herself negotiates the salary, because she's no longer operating from a hidden belief that she should be grateful for whatever she's offered. The external life doesn't transform, and then the self-worth follows. The self-worth shifts, and the external life has no choice but to follow it, because every decision you make is downstream of how worthy you secretly believe you are. So here's the deeper version of the affirmation work, the version most people never get to, because they stop at the surface level. It's not just repeating a sentence when you feel like giving up. It's using that moment as a signal, a kind of internal alarm, that tells you exactly where the old belief is still operating. The feeling of wanting to give up is rarely random. It shows up in specific places. usually right before you're about to do something that would actually require you to believe you deserve more. Right before sending the message that asks for clarity in a relationship. Right before applying for the role you feel underqualified for. Right before setting a boundary with someone who's used to you not having any. The timing isn't a coincidence. The part of you that wants to give up is often the same part that's terrified of what happens if you don't. Because if you don't give up, you might actually get the thing you've been quietly convinced you don't deserve. And that's the kind of fear most people never even name out loud. Let that sit for a second, because it reframes the entire feeling. What if wanting to give up isn't weakness at all? What if it's the oldest part of you trying to protect itself from a future it doesn't know how to believe in yet? This is exactly the moment Louise Hay's affirmation was built for. Not for casual bad days, for the specific, charged moment when you're standing right at the edge of an old identity, about to either retreat into it one more time or speak something new over yourself instead. I am willing to release the pattern in me that created this condition. Said once, it's just words. Said in that exact moment, meant fully, it becomes a decision. A small, quiet rebellion against the version of you that almost everyone, including for years, even you, assumed was just who you are. Here's the final layer, and it's the one I want you to actually carry with you after this video ends. Healing a belief like this is rarely a single dramatic event. It's not a lightning bolt moment where everything suddenly clicks and you're a different woman by morning. It's closer to erosion, quiet, repeated, almost imperceptible day to day, until one day you notice you reacted to something differently than you used to, and you can't even pinpoint when the shift happened. That's not a flaw in the process. That's exactly what real change looks like. Anyone promising you an instant transformation is selling you something. Louise Hay never did. Her work was patient, repetitive, almost stubbornly gentle. Say the words, look yourself in the eyes, release the pattern, again and again, until the old story simply runs out of places to hide. So if tonight or any night soon you feel that familiar heaviness creeping in, that quiet, I don't know if I can keep doing this, I want you to remember this isn't the moment you're failing. It's the moment the old belief is closest to the surface, which means it's also the moment it's closest to finally being released. Look at yourself, even just in your phone camera if there's no mirror nearby, and say it slowly. I am willing to release the pattern in me that created this condition. Not because the sentence is magic, because you, finally, are choosing to stop building the same room. And if this is the first time you've heard your inner pattern explain this clearly, ask yourself one more question before you go. If this is what's been running underneath the relationships, the money, the body image, what else in every other part of your life has actually been the same story wearing a different face the whole time?